The history of capitalism is not a story of economic growth. It is a chronicle of raw, unyielding power. It is an evolution that started in the blood-soaked soil of American plantations, only to hide itself decades later within the digital ledgers of global hedge funds. Behind the mask of free markets and democracy, the world has watched the crown pass, from the slave driver's whip to the industrial titan's iron fist, and finally, to the faceless financiers who rule the world through debt and the almighty dollar. Every era of this empire was baptized in the fires of war, where blood was spilled to clear the path for profit. But today, the machine is choking on its own dominance. As the world rebels and the system fractures from within, a haunting question remains. Is the American empire finally collapsing, or is it preparing for a new mutation? One that is more invisible, more sophisticated, and more dangerous than ever before. Welcome to the Invisible Driver, where there are truths that society doesn't want you to know. Most of us were taught that slavery was a tragedy of labor, a dark stain of moral failure on the pages of history. But that is only the surface. If you look at the dusty ledgers of the 18th and 19th centuries, you will find a truth much more chilling. Slavery wasn't just about picking cotton or cutting cane. It was the very bedrock of American finance. You see, in the eyes of the elite, a slave wasn't just a worker. They were a liquid, transferable asset, a walking, breathing ATM. Banks in New York and London, the same institutions that still rule the world today, didn't just fund plantations. They securitized human lives. If a plantation owner wanted to expand, he didn't show his harvest records. He used his slaves as collateral. He mortgaged their bodies to the banks to get the capital he needed. Thousands of men, women, and children were transformed into financial instruments, their heartbeats literally converted into interest rates. This is the raw DNA of the system we still inhabit. The lesson is brutal, but necessary. To the architect of power, you are never a human being with a soul. You are a unit of production, a line on a balance sheet. But as the 19th century progressed, the masters realized that managing bodies was messy. Revolts were expensive. Moral outcries were bad for branding. They needed a new way to control the masses, a way that was cleaner, more efficient, and far more profitable. They were about to trade the wooden whip for the iron gear, and the world was never the same. As the smoke cleared from the Civil War, the masters of the plantation didn't disappear. They simply evolved. They traded their fields for factories and their wooden whips for the iron gears of the Industrial Revolution. This was the Gilded Age, a time of gold-plated excess built on a foundation of cold, hard monopoly. The names we are taught to admire, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, were not just successful businessmen. They were architects of a new kind of prison. Take John D. Rockefeller and his Standard Oil empire. He didn't just want to produce oil. He wanted to own the bottleneck. By controlling the refineries and the railroad transport, he turned the entire American economy into his private toll road. If you wanted to light your home or move your goods, you paid Rockefeller. It wasn't a free market, it was a stranglehold. This is where the great American lie was born. The idea that competition is the heart of capitalism. In reality, for the elite, competition is a sin. They realize that you don't need to own the person if you own everything the person needs to survive. From the rails under your feet to the fuel in your lamp, the infrastructure of life became the new plantation. The lesson for us today is clear. Power doesn't care about products. It cares about control. He who owns the infrastructure owns the people. But even as these titans sat on their thrones of steel and oil, they faced a constant threat: the volatility of the market. They had the factories, they had the rails, but they didn't have the ultimate weapon yet. They needed a way to stabilize their power forever, by owning the very paper everyone used to buy their goods. And that journey leads us to a secret meeting on a dark night, on a private island, that would kill the American Republic once and for all. Imagine a room where the fate of 300 million people was decided in total secrecy, by the very men they were supposed to be protected from. In November 1910, a private railroad car left New Jersey under a veil of darkness. Its passengers? The elite agents of the Rockefeller, Morgan, and Rothschild empires. Their destination was Jekyll Island, a secluded retreat off the coast of Georgia. For 10 days, these rivals, who publicly pretended to hate each other, sat around a table to craft a master plan. They didn't come to save the American economy. They came to capture it. The result was the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Don't let the name fool you. The Federal Reserve is about as federal as Federal Express. It is a private banking cartel that was granted the ultimate superpower, the exclusive right to create the nation's money out of thin air, and then lend it back to the government at interest. This was the day the American Republic truly died. Think about it. Every single dollar in your pocket today is a receipt of debt. Every time the FED prints a bill, it creates a debt that can never be paid off because the interest required to pay it doesn't even exist yet. The system was designed to be a treadmill, one where you have to run faster every year just to stay in the same place. The lesson is simple, yet devastating. When a private group controls the currency, they control the laws, the leaders, and the very time you spend working for your paycheck. But owning one nation wasn't enough for these architects. To truly solidify their grip, they needed a way to force the entire world into this debt trap. They needed a global reset, a cataclysm so large it would break the old empires and leave only one standing. They needed a world war. You've been told that wars are fought for freedom, for democracy, or to stop a tyrant. But if you follow the money, you'll find that war is actually the ultimate business model and the most efficient way to reset the global debt cycle. To a banker, there is no such thing as a wrong side in a war. The best-case scenario for the invisible elite is a long, bloody conflict where both sides are equally desperate. Why? Because a nation at war will borrow any amount of money at any interest rate just to survive. They don't care about the cost, they care about the ammunition. Take World War I and World War II. While the youth of America and Europe were dying in the mud, the banking houses in New York were busy writing checks to both sides. They funded the destruction, and then in a masterstroke of greed, they funded the reconstruction. You see, destruction creates a massive, forced demand for new infrastructure, and that reconstruction is paid for with, you guessed it, more debt. By the time the guns fell silent in 1945, the old empires of Europe were bankrupt, broken, and buried in I O Us. But the American financial elite, they emerged as the only ones with a clean factory and a full vault. They didn't just win the war, they bought the future. The lesson is a hard pill to swallow. Your patriotism is their profit margin. While you see a flag, they see a loan agreement. But the masters of the dollar knew that military victory was temporary. To keep the world under their thumb forever, They needed to stop using bullets and start using rules. They needed to design a trap so perfect that no nation would ever want to leave it. A trap called stability. And that trap was set in a small hotel in New Hampshire, under the name Bretton Woods. In 1944, while the world was still bleeding out on the battlefields, the architects of the New Order gathered at a luxury hotel in New Hampshire. They called it the Bretton Woods Conference. On the surface, it was presented as a noble effort to prevent another Great Depression, a way to ensure global stability. But in reality, it was the moment the golden handcuffs were locked onto the wrists of every nation on Earth. The deal was simple. The US dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, and every other currency in the world would be pegged to the dollar. To trade, to grow, to survive, you had to use the greenback. Washington didn't just become the world's police, it became the world's accountant. And to ensure no one stepped out of line, they created the enforcement wings, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. These weren't charities. They were debt collection agencies. If a developing nation needed a road or a power plant, it had to borrow in dollars. But there was a catch, a poison pill. To get the money, these countries had to surrender their sovereignty, privatize their resources, and open their gates to American corporations. The lesson for the sovereign individual is this: stability is often just a polite word for dependency. When you rely on someone else's scale to weigh your value, you've already lost the game. For nearly 30 years, this system ruled supreme. The dollar was as good as gold, or so they said. But the masters of the press eventually got greedy. They printed more paper than they had gold in the vaults, and the world began to notice. The trap was about to spring. The golden era was ending, and a new age of pure, unbacked deception was about to begin, orchestrated by a single announcement from a president in the middle of a Sunday night. On a quiet Sunday night, August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon walked into the living rooms of millions of Americans and committed the greatest financial heist in human history. He called it a temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. That temporary measure is now over 50 years old, and it changed the nature of your reality forever. Before this moment, the government was on a leash. They couldn't print more money than they had gold in the vaults. But Nixon cut that leash. Overnight, the dollar stopped being money and became currency, a piece of paper backed by nothing but faith and credit. In other words, a pinky promise from a government buried in debt. This was the birth of the Great Deception. When money is no longer tied to anything physical, the elite can print as much of it as they need to fund their wars and their corporate bailouts. But there's a catch. Every new dollar they print makes the dollars in your pocket worth less. This is called the Cantillon effect. The closer you are to the printing press, the big banks and the government, the richer you get. By the time that new money reaches you, prices have already gone up, and your hard-earned savings have been bled dry. Look at the data. Since 1971, productivity has soared, but real wages for the American worker have stayed flat. You are working harder, but the system is designed to harvest your time through inflation. The lesson you must learn is this: if you save currency, you are a loser by design. To survive this matrix, you must own assets, things the government cannot print into oblivion. But as the masters of the press realized they could manufacture infinite currency, they stopped worrying about owning factories or gold mines. They moved into the shadows. They realized that if you own the debt of every corporation on the planet, you own the world itself. And that brings us to the rise of the Shadow Kings, the invisible giants who now own the very air you breathe. You are living in an illusion of choice. You walk down the grocery aisle, choosing between hundreds of brands. You look at the stock market, seeing thousands of companies. But if you pull back the curtain and follow the ownership change to the very top, you will find only 2 or 3 names waiting for you in the shadows. Welcome to the era of the Shadow Kings, BlackRock and Vanguard. These are not just investment firms. They are the most powerful entities to ever exist in human history. Between them, they manage over $20 trillion. To put that in perspective, that is more than the entire GDP of the European Union. They are the top shareholders in Apple and Microsoft. They own the largest stakes in Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They are the primary owners of the banks that lend you money, the media companies that tell you what to think, and the defense contractors that build the machines of war. In this system, competition is a ghost. No matter who wins the market war, the Shadow Kings get their cut. But their real power isn't just the money, it's the control. Through a system called ESG, environmental, social, and governance. They use your own pension funds and your own 401s to force corporations to follow their global agenda. If a CEO doesn't fall in line, the Shadow Kings simply vote them out. They don't need to hold a gun to a nation's head when they hold the keys to its entire economy. The lesson for you is this. The brand on the box is irrelevant. The logo on the building is a distraction. In a world of centralized ownership, true independence only comes when you stop being a passive consumer of their products and start becoming a conscious owner of your own life. But even this massive web of corporate ownership has a flaw. It still relies on human systems, on laws, and on physical assets. The masters of the Matrix knew that to achieve total, irreversible dominance, they had to move beyond the physical world. They needed to stop owning the things you buy and start owning the very data that defines who you are. They were preparing to move the plantation from the land into the cloud. Have you ever wondered why the heart of American industry cities like Detroit, Gary, and Pittsburgh became hollowed-out ghost towns in just a single generation? You were told it was efficiency. You were told it was the natural evolution of trade. But the truth is much darker. Globalism wasn't a strategy to enrich the world. It was a calculated divorce between the American elite and the American worker. The masters of the dollar realized that an American worker with a union, a vote, and an expectation of a middle-class life was too expensive and too difficult to control. So they decided to export the plantation. Under the banner of free trade and organizations like the WTO, they dismantled the American factory and rebuilt it in nations with no labor laws, no environmental rules, and no freedom. They traded the American dream for a global system of modern serfdom. Think about the products you buy every day. Most are designed in a glass tower in California, but manufactured by hands that will never know liberty. The elite found a way to have the best of both worlds. They kept the high profit margins of the West, while utilizing the near-slave labor of the East. While your father's manufacturing job vanished, your debt increased to pay for the cheap goods that replaced it. This was the masterstroke. They destroyed your ability to produce, so they could force you to borrow just to consume. The lesson is a hard one. A nation that does not make its own things cannot remain free. When you lose the ability to provide for yourself, you lose your leverage. You become a hostage to a global supply chain owned by the very people who sent your job overseas. But even this global factory was just a stepping stone. As we speak, the elite are realizing that even the most desperate human worker is becoming obsolete. They no longer need your muscle, and they no longer need to export serfdom to distant lands. They have found a way to bring the fences of the plantation directly to you, into your pocket, into your home, and into your very mind. They are moving from the factory floor to the digital cloud. The physical fences of the old world are coming down, only to be replaced by digital ones you can't see, but you can certainly feel. We have entered the era of the digital plantation. In the 18th century, the overseer held a whip. Today, the overseer is an algorithm, and the terms and conditions you blindly click are the new chains. You've been told that your data is just for better ads, but that is the greatest lie of the 21st century. Your data is the new cotton. Every click, every search, every biometric scan is a harvest. The tech giants aren't just selling your preferences. They are building a digital twin of your soul to predict and eventually dictate your behavior. Think about the free apps you use every day. If you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. But it goes deeper than consumption. We are seeing the quiet rollout of financial surveillance that would make the tyrants of old jealous. Central bank digital currencies and ESG-linked credit scores are being designed to track not just what you buy, but who you are. If your behavior doesn't align with the system's goals, the digital gatekeepers can simply flip a switch and cut you off from the economy. No blood, no noise, just a transaction denied screen. The lesson for this new age is vital. Your attention is the last piece of territory they don't fully own yet. Guard it like your life depends on it. Because in this matrix, your consciousness is the ultimate prize. But here is the truth. The architects don't want you to realize. Every system of control, no matter how sophisticated, has a fail-safe. For every digital lock, there is a key. The walls are high, and the surveillance is everywhere, but the door to the outside is still standing wide open, if you have the courage to see it. It is time to stop being a unit of data and start being a sovereign human being. It is time to learn how to walk away. We have spent this time tracing the evolution of your chains. From the blood of the plantation to the invisible algorithms of the digital cloud. By now, the weight of this truth might feel like a cage. But here is the secret the architects of power fear most. A cage only works if the prisoner believes the walls are solid. Exiting the matrix isn't about a violent revolution or a political savior. It is about the sovereign individual. It is the process of making yourself irrelevant to their system. When you own hard assets, things like physical gold, land, or decentralized money like Bitcoin, you are removing your energy from their printing press. When you acquire skills that the world actually needs, rather than a corporate title, you are reclaiming your labor from their ledgers. Think about the pioneer spirit that built this country. Those men and women didn't ask for a credit score. They built their own foundations. Today, that spirit lives in the opt-out movement. It lives in people who choose local networks over global chains, who choose encrypted privacy over digital surveillance, and who choose the uncomfortable truth over the comforting lie. Every time you move your wealth out of their banks and your mind out of their media, you are performing an act of liberation. The lesson is this: the system does not have power over you. It has the power you give it. Your attention is the fuel. Your debt is the battery. Your compliance is the key. Stop feeding the machine and the machine starves. The history of capitalism was written by those who sought to control you. But the next chapter, that is yours to write. The walls are thin. The door is unlocked. The only question left is, do you have the courage to walk through it? Welcome to the invisible driver, where there are truths that society doesn't want you to know.